KFSR at CMAC present the Central Valley Ledger, a public affairs program featuring stories from all over the Central Valley with Sevag Tateosian, 90.7 KFSR.
Welcome to another edition of the Central Valley Ledger. We're recording out of the beautiful downtown Fresno studios of the Community Media Access Collaborative, Fresno and Clovis. Our guest this week is joining us via Skype. She will be in Fresno not too long from now, Stephanie Ayanian. And first, let me welcome you to the program.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about what it is you're going to be doing here in Fresno.
I am so excited to come to Fresno. First, I have to say that my parents were born and raised there. And so my grandparents had farms there, and I felt like it was my second home. And so to be able to come there is awesome. But the reason I'm coming is because I just finished a documentary film for public television distribution, and Fresno State and the Cineculture series has invited me to come and screen the film for the audience there, and I'm excited to come and do it. The film is called What Will Become of Us, and it is a documentary about Armenians in America today.
So before we get there, tell us a little bit about your background. I was excited to hear that you've got relatives that are in the Fresno area, and your grandparents were from Fresno.
Yeah. So my background is, I'll tell you about my personal background first. So I was actually born in Northern California. My parents left Fresno, I think in the 60s. And my father was pursuing a PhD at Stanford. And so I was born in that region. And then we moved to central Pennsylvania so that he could work at Penn State University. And ultimately, because of that, I ended up going to Penn State. And while I was there, I started making films. I was a film and video student. And that in 1996 is when I started making my first documentaries and my first films.
So one day when you come to Fresno, we would like to invite you to come to CMAC Studios and see all the cool gadgets that this Community Media Access Collaborative has for the Fresno Clovis area. I feel like you would be home here because of all the technology, right? Do you feel that way when you go into a studio?
I do. I feel at home among my people and the technology. More so the people, because the funny thing is I kind of gave up on running a lot of the technology a little while ago to focus on producing and directing. That being said, I'm sure I could jump right back in and figure it all out pretty quickly. But yeah, it would be fun to come and visit you guys. Thank you.
So today we're talking via Skype. Obviously, you're not in the Fresno area. Talk about where you are right now and, some of the things you're involved in.
So I am actually in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, which is just outside of Philadelphia. I came here actually to go to graduate school in 2003. And my plan is that I would do graduate school at Temple University for 3 years, and then I would leave, and with my master's degree, I would be able to go teach at the university level. But 6 months before I was going to graduate, I met this wonderful man named Gatto, and ultimately we got married. And his entire family is in the Philadelphia region, and so it made sense for us to stay here. So that's where I am. And I own a small production company with 2 filmmaking partners. One, Joseph Myers, lives in Chicago. And the other one, Tom Kiter, lives in central Pennsylvania, State College, Pennsylvania. And we do feature documentaries, and we also do client work.
So is that Story Shop? I see your tagline, Story Shop. Tell us about Story Shop.
So Story Shop started because my filmmaking partners, Tom and Joe, and I were working at Penn State Public Broadcasting. We were full-time filmmakers working at a PBS station. And ultimately, I needed to leave that job because I started having kids, and I wanted more flexibility to not have to travel 3 hours back and forth from the Philadelphia region to the State College area. So I left that position. And after I left that position, we started Story Shop Films with the idea that we could kind of continue to make similar type of work, but on our own schedules and for our own clients. And so what we've done with the feature documentaries and and short documentaries is we've found work that's meaningful to us, to each of us, and we've pursued those pieces. And then once in a while, in fact, pretty often to pay the bills, we end up doing client work. And a lot of our client work is actually based in educational advancement. So when a major university or college has a capital fundraising campaign, they hire us to come in and make the films to support that campaign. So, for instance, right now we're working on one for Bryn Mawr College, and we work through an agency, Stephanie Thompson Communications. Sometimes we work directly for the college. Sometimes we work through an agency. But, it's fun work. And the thing that's nice about doing that kind of work is not only, like I said, does it pay the bills, but it also takes us to university campuses all over. And you get a really interesting perspective from the students and the faculty and the staff and the presidents about what's going on in education today. And that matters for the work that we're doing because we're making films and we want them to be relevant for today's audiences. But it also makes a different impact on me because I also teach at the university level. So I'm currently teaching documentary film production at Drexel University.
Oh, that's cool. You get to give back to the community what you've learned. Filmmaking and documentary making is such an interesting world. You get to tell stories, and that's what we're all about here at CMAC Studios. So I'm excited about watching your film. I'm excited about the partnership you have with the Armenian Studies program. You mentioned Philadelphia. Not too long ago, we had a musician from the Philadelphia area here in Fresno, Vospigian. He was playing the zurna and clarinet. So it's pretty interesting. Philadelphia's in the house in Fresno these days.
We have some talented people here, I have to say. I'm not including myself. I'm just saying we have a great, vibrant Armenian community here. And we have 5 churches. We have an Armenian day school, the Armenian Sisters Academy. It's pretty cool to be here and be Armenian.
So for the people who are watching this broadcast who are non-Armenian, why should they come and watch the film that you've created, What Becomes of Us?
So that's a really good question. So What Will Become of Us is actually a film that I really wanted to make for a non-Armenian audience. I knew the Armenians were going to watch it because we love watching stories about us, right? And there really aren't enough of them. But I made it for a non-Armenian audience because I wanted them to learn about who we are as Armenians. But I also wanted them to see that, all of us have similar stories. And so I was just talking to some friends of friends this last weekend, and one of them was Indian American and one of them is South African American. And I was telling them about this concept of, whether or not we can ever measure up as, second, third, and fourth generation Americans, right? Immigrant Americans, and whether or not we can kind of meet the expectations of the rest of our culture, right? And this this Indian American woman was talking about how, she always feels judged and she's never Indian enough, right? And this South African American was telling me, yeah, he's never South African enough, right? And so one of the things that, we look at in the film is kind of, who are we as immigrants in America today? And do we need to perform our culture to be able to fit into our culture, or can we just be part of our culture and exist in America? And so my hope is that, immigrants, first, second, third, fourth generation, which is most people in America, will find parts of the story that they connect with and feel like is part of their story too.
So let's take a minute break and watch the film, part of the film, give the audience a little bit of taste of what is up to come.
Genocide always cast a long shadow.
Our place at the table of nations. In 1915, that place was nearly stolen from us.
With Armenians, we do have this heaviness.
I feel a responsibility to share that story in a way that doesn't feel as traumatic.
This is a new era for us.
Welcome back to the program. Our guest is Stephanie Ayanian. She will be in Fresno coming up real soon, and they will be showing her film. She, along with the Armenian Studies program, are going to show a documentary, What Will Become of Us? And she follows around 4 families. Well, let me tell you, I'll let you tell the story. So who do you follow in this documentary?
We're actually following 8 people. We originally set out to follow 5, and and we ended up following 10. And unfortunately, we had to cut it down to only follow 8. So let me tell you about who we're following now. So from the Fresno area, we are following Richard and Andrew Hagopian. Many people know Richard and his music. He is a world famous oud player and just an amazing human being. And the story follows him and his grandson, Andrew. Andrew is working hard to claim the legacy of his ancestors and of his grandfather. And he has actually a sibling and cousins who are also amazing musicians. So I should say that. But unfortunately, they're not included in the film. But yeah, Andrew is an amazing oud player. He plays other instruments as well. And so when we started filming with him, he was a teenager. I think he was 15 when we started, actually. And I remember that when we sat down with them, I said, I'd really love to see this process of, Richard, how you teach Andrew a new song. And they sat down, and then Andrew just played the song. And I was like, what's going on? It was just, it was unbelievable to me. I'm like, how did he just know that? And one of the things that Richard said to me, and it might have been on camera, but it doesn't make it into the final film, is this idea that in the same way that I learned language in the home, Andrew learned music, right? And so it was just, it's part of being in the family, and it's part of, it's almost in the blood, right? So their story is beautiful, and I love sharing, a Fresno story through Richard and Andrew. We also follow Adam Hamparian from the Armenian National Committee of America. His story is based in Washington, D.C., and we follow his fight for genocide recognition through the story of the unveiling of the orphan rug at the White House Visitor Center. And I'm just going to go through some of the other stories a little quicker because they're not based in Fresno, but I love them equally. We also follow Sebu Simonian of Capital Cities. Capital Cities is an American pop band, and he is a songwriter and a singer in the band. And we follow his story where he is talking about his identity and what it means 100 years after the genocide. And it was really fun to follow him because we got to see him on stage, not only at one of his, big shows in the United States, but also on stage in Times Square during the 100th anniversary of the genocide, where he's talking about being Armenian and the importance of the culture in his life. We also follow Lori Tatulian, who has roots in the Central Valley. Her father was a priest there for a long time and then moved south to be a priest. I think he was in San Diego last as a member of the clergy. But I believe he started off just south of Fresno, or at least he was there for a long time when Lori was young. She is a comedian, and she is a playwright and an actress, and her show, The Big Bad Armo Show, is featured in the film. The reason that I really wanted to tell her story is because, number one, she's a really strong woman, and oops, my phone dinged. And number two, I wanted to tell her story because she's doing something really different. She is looking at cultural stereotypes within the community and poking fun at them in a way that I think is really important. And I want to say also that, I didn't make this film on my own. This is a film that was a group effort. I had a team behind me. So when I say it's really we. I have a co-director, Joseph Myers, who was there with me like every step of the way. And we were filming together, the two of us, for years. And my partner, Tom Kiter, was there for some of it. And then we really, really leaned on the new thought process from a writer, Mary McDermott, because once Joe and I had gone out and filmed for a few years, we needed some fresh perspective on the best stories to tell and how to tell them. And then we also leaned on our writer and editor, Greg Feinberg, to come in and help us craft those stories as well.
We talked about Richard and Andrew Hagopian. We talked about Adam Hamparian and Miss Tatulian. Talk a little bit about some of the others.
So we met this amazing couple in Madison, Wisconsin, John and Annie Swears. And they were planning to do a Birthright Armenia trip, to travel to Armenia and volunteer there. And the thing that I loved about their story the most was, initially, before I knew more, was that John is 25% Armenian. He was connected to his Armenian side of his family through his grandmother, but his grandmother died when he was young, and he felt like he lost that side of his identity. So his wife, who's not Armenian, actually heard about Birthright at a gathering in Wisconsin and came home and made the suggestion that they look into it. And so the film, we get to follow them on their trip to Armenia. And it is, I just love it. I love seeing Armenia through their eyes. And I also love understanding what it means to be Armenian through their eyes. So they were really exciting to follow. We also talked to genocide survivor Sevag Tateosian, who I believe was 108 when we filmed with her. And we heard her story to contextualize what happened during the genocide for a non-Armenian audience. Because, of course, we have to be able to explain what the genocide was to be able to understand where we are 100 years later. And we were able to not only tell her story from her story that she gave us in her interview, but we also got to learn more about it from her granddaughter, Kadin Shamlian. And Kadin talks about what it means to be Armenian in America today. We also got to speak with John Simonian, who is a former investment banker out of New York City. And he is working to figure out how to revitalize the Armenian community. His concern is that people are dropping out of the culture and not caring as much about being Armenian in America. And so we followed their stories, and we followed a few others, but those are the people who are in the final 1 hour film. Ultimately, we did film 10 stories, and we had a 90-minute version, but PBS stations like to screen hour-long films. So we had to cut a third of the film to get down to that hour-long mark. And unfortunately, 2 of our really amazing stories hit the cutting room floor, and 2 of our stories with Kadin Shamlian and John Simonian got greatly reduced. But I'm really excited for audiences to see the other stories and to see this hour-long film that we do have. And I'm excited to see their reactions and hear their stories, because usually when you share a film with an audience, they then get to share their stories with us.
So let me ask you about Richard and Andrew Hagopian.
Yeah.
Even Andrew is an excellent musician. Richard is an excellent musician. How important are people like Richard and Andrew, not only for our community, the non-Armenian community, but for the Armenian American community as well? Because, this oud playing is not easy.
It's not. And it's funny because I'll start off by saying I'm a filmmaker. So, I can't really completely connect to the importance of such a thing, because really that should be a question for the musicians, right? For the people who are actually in charge of keeping those traditions alive. But they're sincerely important to me. One of the reasons that we wanted to follow a story related to Richard is because he played at my parents' wedding. He is, part of being Armenian in America, part of being Armenian in California. He is part of so many of our stories. And now Andrew is going to be part of so many of our stories. So what they're doing, I think, is really important. And what's important to me is that the work that they're doing is going to now carry on so that my children can now hear that music that could be lost if they're not playing it. And that's the music that I grew up with. That's the music that feels most at home for me.
Easy question. I'm going to throw you a softball on this one, but the Armenian genocide must have come up several times during the making of this film. Talk about the genocide a little bit and the way the people in the film told the story, because, Aram Hamparian with the Armenian National Committee of America, I mean, he fights for recognition of this on a daily basis.
Yeah, he does. And it's interesting. So the genocide is so much part of the fabric of being Armenian, right? It defines who we are and where we are. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for the genocide, meaning in America. We would probably be back at our homes in Western Armenia. But so for me as a filmmaker and for my partners working together, we knew we wanted to do something different. And so while we knew that the genocide was going to be an important part of the film, it wasn't going to be what the film was about. So we know that there have been amazing films about the genocide that talk about the history and are really important historical pieces that we can use as teaching tools and as learning tools. But we really wanted to do something that was forward-looking, to look at where we are 100 years later. But to look at where we are 100 years later, we can't negate the fact that that happened 100 years ago, and that placed us in our positions today. So when we talked to each of our characters, we talked to them about the genocide and, how it kind of influenced what they do today. And it was all of the filmmaking was with the backdrop, of the 100th anniversary of the genocide, right? So many of these people were doing new projects based on the 100th anniversary. Michael Adam, the sculptor and metal worker, was unveiling a sculpture as part of the film. He was creating and unveiling that sculpture. So, these are people who are very much affected by the genocide, but are doing things today that show how we can thrive in America 100 years later, and that we are not to just be defined by the genocide.
It's obvious you don't do a film like this to make money, right? A film like this is more to tell a story. I know because I've been involved in a lot of genocide recognitions and storytelling of our story of being Armenian American, using a mainstream American media to tell our story. So why do this? I mean, you're a busy person. We all got families. You got a lot on your plate, it sounds like, as well. But this wasn't a moneymaker for you, obviously.
No, I have not made a documentary to make money, and I think it's extremely rare to make a documentary that makes money. I make documentaries so that I can educate people and so that we can educate people and have a conversation, right? It's not about me. It's about, let's have a conversation about this story. Let's open up a dialogue, right? And the thing that motivated me to make it is in 2014, on April 24th, 2014, I was sitting with my husband in our living room, and I said, next year is the 100th anniversary of the genocide. I hope that someone is making something, in commemoration of it that can go out on public television. And so I started to research to find out if anyone was making anything. And what I found out was that people were making some pieces, not necessarily for public television. At least the people that I had talked to didn't know about the pieces at the time, if there were going to be any. And the pieces that I did find out about were about the genocide. And so my partners and I decided, we need to do something really different. And when I talked to some content advisors, that's what I always do when I take on a new project. I talk to, scholars and specialists in the field. They said, do something forward-looking, do something that's different. And so that's what we set out to do. And it really became a passion project for all of us.
So we are running out of time this week on the program. Tell us about when you will be in Fresno and how people can come out, support you, watch the video, and anything else you need from us. I mean, we can go to the venue, watch the film, and it's free. So what else? How can we support you?
So first of all, please come on Friday, April 17th at 5:30. It is Leon and Pete Peters Auditorium at Fresno State. So please plan to attend. I want to pack the house. And we're going to have a special appearance by Richard and Andrew Hagopian. They're going to play a little bit for us. So, to entice you a little more. And what would be great is please support the project by liking us on Facebook, where What Will Become of Us film. on Facebook. And then you can also visit our website, whatwillbecomeofus.com. And you can look there for updated broadcast and screening locations all over the country. Also, help tell your friends in other cities to watch the film.
That's all for this edition of the Central Valley Ledger. Our guest has been Stephanie Ayanian. She will be in town in Fresno showing her latest work. It's called What Becomes of Us, or What Will Become of Us. She's partnering with the Armenian Studies Program and Cineculture here in Fresno. Thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's all for this edition of the Central Valley Ledger. We hope you enjoyed the program this week. Thank you to CMAC Studios in downtown Fresno for giving us this wonderful venue. Tune in next week to a new edition.
KFSR and CMAC present the Central Valley Ledger every Sunday morning at 11:30. For a complete program schedule, visit kfsr.org.